Welcome to the latest roundup of news and polls from Ipsos MORI. And this month, as the pandemic continues to recede, we've seen the announcement of the lifting of restrictions, or more restrictions, on Monday the 17th of May. We've found that overall only 1 in 1,000 people have it in our study with Imperial College. The R rate is below 1, so the disease is in abeyance. Public concern about the virus has now fallen to the lowest level it's been in some time, although it's still 6 out of 10 of us who say that we're worried about the virus. So despite the majority of people getting vaccinated, 6 out of 10 of us are still concerned about the threat it poses. But nevertheless, the proportion of people who say they're finding it more difficult to stay positive than before the pandemic has finally fallen very, very markedly. And indeed, we've now got 14% who say it's easier to stay positive than before the pandemic. So certainly optimism is rising. 3/4 of us are now hopeful that lockdown will finish on the 21st of June, and that's far more positive than during the previous lockdown in November, December, when only 43% thought that lockdown would end on time. And of course, they were right. It ended and then had to be reimposed almost immediately. So much more optimism all across the spectrum at the moment. Our biggest concern at the moment is now new vaccine-resistant variants arriving in the UK. And because of that, 8 out of 10 people say that we should stop people coming here from other countries that have higher levels of infections. We've got 67% who said we should stop people entering the country from any other country. So the French, any neighbours won't be allowed in. The Belgians, they're not allowed in. 6 out of 10 want us to stop everybody going abroad on holiday. And I can say that it's interesting that only 20% are opposed to that, because we know that in terms of people's plans for their spending, a lot of people do want to go on holiday and spend money. And finally, 42% say they favour bringing back lockdown measures for the whole country if it will stop the any new variant spreading. I think this is just a reminder of how cautious the British public has been throughout the pandemic. Overall, though, the top concerns looking forward for the rest of this year are a new variant or another wave of cases, the NHS not being able to cope. It's already got an enormous backlog, economic concerns about recession or cuts in spending to public services. And indeed, the thing that they're least worried about is the furlough scheme ending, which is just as well, because that is probably almost certainly going to end. But lots of anxiety still about the disease, which shows that the public is willing to do whatever it takes to conquer the coronavirus. In terms of people's finances as we come out of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people saving more money and cutting their spending across the board. And that means that a large proportion of people have actually saved more money than they've spent during the pandemic. And it will be interesting to see how that plays out in terms of spending down those savings. But a key warning in that is that there's a very unequal recovery, with the young far more likely to have had to borrow money from friends or on credit cards or on overdrafts than older people who have people my age, 55 plus, have been tending to save more money. So again, unequal impact of the pandemic in terms of people's finances. In politics, we saw in the local elections that basically England, Scotland and Wales are now very different places in their political support, with the Labour doing well in Wales, the SNP surging in Scotland, and the Conservatives doing very well, particularly outside the big cities in England. Overall, in the Scottish elections, in terms of the accuracy of our polling, we found that our average error for each party was 1.1%, well below the margin of error of about 3% that you'd normally expect. So we are pleased with that. Nicola Sturgeon, of course, has now announced that she's going to have another referendum once the disease is passed. And that is bitterly divisive inside Scotland, because unionists, people who don't want independence, 3/4 of those should just say, look, forget having a referendum until at least 5 years has passed. But the yes voters who fancy leaving the UK, 56% of them say they must take the UK government to court to get a legal precedent to have another referendum. And indeed, 3 in 10 say don't bother going to court, just have a referendum, whether it's illegal or illegal. So that argument is going to run, and we will keep polling on the matter. Elsewhere, of course, Labour is facing its own huge challenges, with one of the most striking thing in this set of election results was Labour's poor showing in deprived working class areas, Labour doing better in more middle-class urban areas. And we've asked people across England, in the different regions of England, whether they think the government spends more or less on their region compared to other areas. And you can see the majority of people in the north of England, particularly in the northeast, but also the southwest, saying that government spends less on their area per capita than elsewhere. Down south, it's rather more mooted. London, only 31% think they get more spending per capita. The east of England, only 33%. So, of course, people's estimates are out of scope, out of whack with reality. But it just shows that the appeal of the levelling up agenda in these regions. And, one can argue about pork barrel politics or government dropping money into places that support Conservative candidates or Conservative supporting towns. But certainly the northeast and the northwest will want some more government spending. Overall, people say they're happy with their council by 40% to 25%, despite, of course, large cuts in central government grant over the last decade. And elsewhere, we've looked at things like vaccine passports and the first 100 days of Joe Biden. That's all for now. Much more on the website, and see you again in 2 weeks' time.